Welcome back to CFB Cauldron Live. I'm Bubba Walkenmuth, and thank you so much for tuning in to now what is our third episode. So this past weekend, we had an upset-filled weekend. A&M, Notre Dame, Nebraska, a few other teams, Pitt technically at home. There's a lot of upsets this past weekend, and we're going to touch on all of those. But I want to start this week's episode with Big Noon Kickoff, which this past week was Alabama traveling to Austin to take on Steve Sarkisian and the Longhorns. This game, admittedly, was much closer than me and a lot of other people thought it was going to be. The spread was 21.5 by the time the kickoff. The game was much, much closer than that. Neither team even got to 21 points. Alabama struggled running and passing the football. Texas, Gary Patterson, Steve Sarkisian came up with a great game plan to combat the Tide's offense. I want to start off talking about the Alabama passing attack because everyone knows they lose Slade Bolden. They lose John Mechie. They lose Jamison Williams. You lose all these great receivers, but you bring in a few guys, and you have a lot of good guys on the roster. You have Trayshawn Holden. You have Ja'Cory Brooks. You have Cameron Latu at tight end. You bring in Jermaine Burton. You bring in Tyler Harrell. And these guys really haven't found where they fit into the offense yet, except Cam Latu. But the receivers haven't figured out where they fit into this offense yet. Looking at this past week, Trayshawn Holden was the leading receiver out of the receiving group. Jahmyr Gibbs led the team in receptions and receiving yards. But the leading receiver, as far as wide receivers on the team, was Trayshawn Holden with 4 receptions for 39 yards. Ja'Cory Brooks behind him with 3 receptions for 33 yards. Cam Latu had 4 catches for 28 yards. He's a tight end, but I'm including him in this group. Kobe Prentice, freshman, but 4 receptions for 27 yards. And that may be the biggest disappointment of the entire week, Jermaine Burton with only 2 receptions for 10 yards. So I think these receivers don't quite know what the roles are yet. Who's going to stretch the field vertically? Who's going to be the great route runner who can constantly get open like John Mechie was last year? Who's going to be a consistent slot receiver like Slade Bolden was last year? So I think this Alabama offense needs time to round out as far as the passing game goes. As far as the running game goes, if you look at the box score, you're not going to think anything was. You're going to think Alabama ran the ball pretty effectively against this Texas defense. But in reality, if you take out Jace McClellan's 81-yard touchdown run, the Tide only ran for 2.9 yards per carry on the 23 carries, and that is without McClellan's long touchdown run. So Alabama wasn't able to run the ball effectively besides one play. Thankfully for Alabama, though, they have number 9 on their team. I don't think they win this game without Bryce Young either. Bryce Young was a magician on the last drive. He escaped the pocket multiple times, was hitting receivers in their hands. Isaiah Bond, who's a freshman, dropped a pass. Jermaine Burton dropped a pass or two. There's other drops that I'm not mentioning as well. But Bryce Young had a fantastic game. Alabama does not win this game, probably if they have anyone else at quarterback besides number 9. Let's talk about the Longhorns now. Excellent game planning by Sarkisian. We knew he was an offensive wizard, but Quinn Ewers and this offense were clicking on all levels when the game started, moving the ball in a really, really talented Tide defense, really great pass rushers, good secondary. I thought Alabama had one of the better secondaries heading into the season, maybe even the best. Texas was able to get behind them multiple times. Texas was able to confuse them, get a few guys open. Ultimately, it's just really disappointing that Quinn Ewers got hurt. I mean, I think everyone knows at this point that Texas probably wins this game if Quinn Ewers is able to finish it. Got knocked out, and even Hudson Card, he did a good job in relief, but he was playing on one leg as well. So I would have been interested to see how this game would have turned out if Quinn Ewers would have finished. Texas most likely would have won, knocked off number 1 Crimson Tide. But the biggest thing for Alabama going forward is figuring out what roles each receiver needs to fill on offense. What does Ja'Cory Brooks need to bring to this offense? What does Jermaine Burton need to bring to this offense? What does Trayshawn Holden need to bring to this offense? Isaiah Bond, Kobe Prentice, these young guys, can they play a role? And then running the ball, Alabama offensive line, personnel-wise, is probably worse than they were last year. You lose a top 5 pick in Evan Neal. Now, you do bring in a new offensive line coach, but it's going to take a little bit of time for this group to gel. So I expect that group to help with the running game, and they'll continue to improve as the season progresses. But ultimately, I think for the Longhorns, I think the most important thing is getting Quinn Ewers back before the Oklahoma game. Obviously, we don't know. It's 4 to 6 weeks if it's on the short end or long end of that. But if it's on the short end, you hope that Hudson Card can, if he plays this week, can keep you afloat for 3 games. You have Texas Tech, you have UTSA, and you have West Virginia. Hudson Card needs to go out, win those games, and set you up, hopefully, for a Quinn Ewers return in Dallas against Oklahoma. Next game we're going to talk about, another noon game, is going to be South Carolina traveling to Fayetteville to take on Arkansas. And let me tell you, Arkansas played bully ball on the Gamecocks this past weekend. Arkansas ran for 295 yards. KJ Jefferson didn't have to do a whole lot with his arm because South Carolina was just letting Arkansas run all over them. Raheem Rocket Sanders had an excellent game. He got better as the game went on as well. I mean, you can see him. He's running harder. I mean, he's getting harder to tackle as the game progressed, which is a great sign in a running back. South Carolina on defense, last year they were the worst SEC run defense. Arkansas was the best SEC run offense, so this wasn't a great matchup for South Carolina on the defensive end. They had 6 players go out with injury throughout the course of the game, which is going to happen when you play a physical team like Arkansas. I think it's just about trying to limit the run game going forward, but I think South Carolina's defense, you knew this wasn't going to be a great matchup for them, and it showed. On the flip side of the football, this Arkansas defense is so much fun to watch. Drew Sanders is flying around making plays. Every time you turn on Arkansas, 42's flying sideline to sideline. He's getting sacks. Here he is actually right on this side. There he is right there, flying across the field like a missile, tackling from sideline to sideline. Rangy player, can blitz the pass rusher or blitz the quarterback. It's interesting how Arkansas used him. I thought Arkansas was going to use him more as an edge rusher. Seems like he's playing more in that interior linebacker position, which it's good for Arkansas because it's obviously working out because Drew Sanders is playing great. You have Bumper Pool, who's a tackling machine there in the interior of that Arkansas defense. Jordan Dominique, transferred from Georgia Tech, who's become a pretty solid edge rusher for the Razorbacks. Dwight McGlover, an LSU transfer, has 2 interceptions in his first 2 games as a Razorback. Can't get off to a much better start than that for Dwight McGlover. But this Arkansas defense is a lot of fun. I know Jalen Catalon's out for the season now, which is a massive blow to these guys. They're going to give up a few big plays. Like if you want to attack this Arkansas defense, you have to be able to stretch the ball vertically. That's the way you're going to attack this defense. Jalen Catalon really hurts them, but they're still going to be a fun group to watch. You're still going to be able to watch Drew Sanders fly around the field. And just in general, the 3-2-6 and 3-3-5 defense, it's going to be an aggressive defense. These DBs have to fly downhill. Arkansas is relying on gang tackles because you have a lot of smaller defenders on the field. So it's an aggressive defense. It's a fun defense to watch. And Barry Odom does a great job coaching them as well. So the last noon game that I want to talk about here really quick, don't want to spend too much time on it because I didn't watch the game too much. But Miami, Southern Miss, I was tuning in, hoping to see something from the Miami offense. They looked pretty vanilla against Bethune-Cookman. They may have been even more vanilla against Southern Miss. I mean, it's a lot of power, a lot of swing passes, it's a lot of screens. I mean, there wasn't a lot going on in this Miami offense. I was kind of disappointed. I was hoping they tried to put something on film for A&M, just so A&M had to prepare for it. But it seems like they're trying to be a closed book heading into next week, or this upcoming week. So Mario Cristobal, and also on the defensive side, Kevin Steele, 4-2-5 the entire game with a nickelback. Nothing creative, nothing crazy. Miami did get the win, but I was just kind of hoping to see a little bit more from both sides of the football. But I understand if the coaching staff doesn't want to show everything they have on film against Southern Miss, or even any of it, because it didn't look like they did. Now, last week we talked about the Miami linebackers. Didn't play great last week. They had an improved game this week, but the second corner position for Miami, there's still question mark, to say the least. I mean, so Miami put 3 guys out there for the most part. You have Malik Curtis, you had DJ Ivey, and you had Darryl Porter Jr., who's the West Virginia transfer, started for them last season. All 3 of these guys had their moments, but all 3 of these guys also struggled. Jason Brownlee is a really good receiver for Southern Miss. He made Darryl Porter look pretty bad on one play, went up, got a football on top of his head. All these guys struggled, so it'd be interesting to see who Miami starts next week. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later because we're previewing the Miami-Texas A&M game this week. But it'll be interesting to see who Miami wants to roll out there with that first-team defense at the second outside corner position, because you have Tyreek Stevenson on one side. Looks like they're fine with Takori Couch on the inside at the nickel. Who's at second corner, and how willing will they be to rotate if someone starts the game off poorly? So we're getting to the first big upset of the day, Marshall at Notre Dame. So to be honest with you, this game wasn't really on my radar for this week. It was one of those weird games because it was a 2:30 kick, so I'm still finishing the Texas and Alabama game, still watching, keeping my eye on Miami, keeping my eye on South Carolina and Arkansas. Then you see that Marshall's hanging, so you turn it on. You don't know what happened because didn't see too many highlights, wasn't watching the game. You turn it on, and I was absolutely shocked when I saw that how aggressive and how fast this Marshall defense was playing. I mean, now credit to Henry Colombi and the Marshall offense. He's a really good quarterback. This is his 3rd stop now, but he played really well. But I really want to focus on what this Marshall defense did to this Notre Dame offense. The Marshall defense had no fear of Notre Dame's vertical passing. I mean, no fear at all. These corners were squatting on these Notre Dame receivers. And if you don't know what that means, it means as the receiver comes towards him, the DB is not in a retreat position. The DB is squatted, ready to break on a route. I mean, if you ever see a defensive back jump a route, jump a curl, jump a hitch, that's what the Marshall DBs were doing almost the entire day, because they were not afraid of these Notre Dame wide receivers or the Notre Dame's wide receivers' abilities to get behind them. You know what that allows Marshall to do when they're playing aggressive coverage like that on the outside and they trust their corners? It allows Marshall to double guys like Michael Mayer, who's Notre Dame's best receiver, even though he's a tight end. They're able to double Michael Mayer a good bit of the time. They're able to stop the Notre Dame rushing game as well. Notre Dame only averaged 3.5 yards per carry, which isn't good enough against most teams. It's definitely not good enough against Marshall. So Notre Dame has to find a vertical passing threat. So Tyler Buckner, quarterback, out for the season. So it's most likely going to be Drew Pine from here on out. Drew Pine's considered the better passer by a few people. Most people think Buckner's a better athlete. But maybe Drew Pine goes in there and ignites this Notre Dame offense. But he kind of has to, because it could get really ugly for the Irish. So their schedule, they play Cal this week. But coming up here, they have BYU in Las Vegas. So that's going to be closer to BYU than it's to South Bend. They play Clemson. They're on the road at North Carolina. They play USC. They play Stanford, I believe. They also have a game at Syracuse, which at the beginning of the year, as a Notre Dame fan, you're like, yeah, I'm never going to worry about a game in the Carrier Dome. Syracuse has looked really good through 2 weeks, though. I mean, so you have to start questioning when you lose a game like Marshall. Almost every game that you play is going to be up for grabs. So it could get really ugly if this Notre Dame doesn't fix that problem of not being able to push the ball vertically down the field. Next upset we want to talk about, similar time slot, 3:30 game. We have App State at Texas A&M. I'm not going to talk about this game too much, simply because I'm going to do a deeper dive on Texas A&M a little bit later on. But I know you've seen this. 41 minutes and 29 seconds. App State, Texas A&M, 18 minutes and 17 seconds. I mean, that's unbelievable. I mean, that's really coming out of that game. If you would have told me that App State would have had the ball for over 41 minutes, I wouldn't have believed you. Especially not because they scored 61 last week against North Carolina. I don't think a lot of people understand how difficult it is to go score 61 points 1 week, basically play in a shootout. I mean, that's what it was. That North Carolina game, App State scored 40 in the fourth quarter. That game was a shootout by the end. To be able to go from a shootout scoring 61 points, to be able to control time of possession, to have the ball 41 minutes, week to week, to be able to fluctuate in styles of play that much from week to week is insanely difficult. But App State was able to do it. There's a lot of Power 5 teams that can't. Actually, most Power 5 teams can't do it, but App State was able to do it. And also, starting running back Nate Noel was out for App State. I mean, Cameron Peoples, they're usually kind of a 1-2 punch, but one of App State's best running backs wasn't playing either. I mean, Chase Bryce fits that offense perfectly. The receiving core is young, but they step up. They make a lot of plays. That App State team is going to be hard to beat in the Sun Belt. I don't know what the odds are for them to win the Sun Belt. I'm sure they're overwhelming favorites at the current moment, though. The only thing I'm going to talk about right now about Texas A&M is Devin Achane only had 11 offensive touches. I know they only had the ball 18 minutes, but he's the best player on offense. He has legit track speed. He's 10-1, 10-2, 100-meter dash guy. You have to get the football in his hands. I mean, he's the best player on your offense. I mean, you have to be creative in the way you get the football in his hands. If you just don't run the football with him, throw a swing. He only had one catch the entire day. Throw a swing pass, run a jet sweep. You had to get him on the run, get him outside. And Texas A&M struggled to do that. I mean, he didn't play bad. He actually had the Aggies only 2 touchdowns of the game. One was on a 26-yard run, and the other one was a touchdown that he returned, or kickoff that he returned for a touchdown. So Devin Achane is the most explosive player, best player on that offense, and Texas A&M isn't getting him the football enough. So we're going to talk about the Aggies a little bit later, but right now I want to talk about Tennessee at Pitt. Shout out Jason in the chat. Appreciate you being here. Tennessee at Pitt. This is a really ugly game if you watched it. I mean, this is people were expecting a lot of points in this game. And that did not happen at all. I mean, Keaton Slovis getting hurt obviously didn't help for Pitt, but Tennessee's offense, which we've seen operate on, when they click at their best, Tennessee's maybe the best offense in the country. I mean, that offense score points with anyone, and that just didn't happen. I mean, they had turnover and downs. They had 2 turnovers, which didn't help. But I think it's a pretty good win for Tennessee, simply because the offense wasn't playing fantastic and they're still able to win. I mean, when you have a team like Tennessee and you rely so heavily on offense, sometimes if the offense isn't there, you just don't have an opportunity to win the game. But the defense played better than the score would indicate. The defense, they got off to a slow start. Pitt scored 10 really quick, and they're about to score 17, but they had an interception in the end zone. But the Tennessee defense got put in a few bad situations because of turnovers. They were able to at minimum slow the Pitt offense, hold them to a field goal, hold them to a missed field goal a few times. So good win from Tennessee. You're just happy you leave that game with a win. You play Akron now. 2 weeks is a big game. They play Florida at Neyland, which is probably going to be one of the bigger games on their schedule this entire season. So that's the game as a Tennessee fan you're looking forward to here in 2 weeks, but you're just happy you escaped the Pitt game with a win. Next game I want to talk about, we're moving to the nighttime slot now. Kentucky at Florida. I apologize to Mark Stoops. I know there's a lot of people that doubted him and continually doubt him, and I'm not sure why. It's amazing when you think about it that Mark Stoops has turned Kentucky into perennial winners. Not only perennial winners, but perennial 9-10 win team. Year after year, Kentucky is in contention, maybe not in contention, but they're first, second, third in the East at certain points of the season. Kentucky went out there and they played better than Florida. They played better on defense. The offense got better as the game went on. Kentucky had a great game plan to stop Anthony Richardson. I just want to talk about Anthony Richardson really quick. I think there's probably some people that are overreacting to this performance. It wasn't great. And if you didn't watch it, he was 14 for 35, which is 40% completion percentage, 143 yards, and 2 interceptions, one that went for a touchdown. One was a really great play by the Kentucky defensive end where he went out there and snagged the ball in the air. The other one was a miscommunication, got returned for a touchdown. So it wasn't a great game for Anthony Richardson, but I didn't expect Anthony Richardson to play seamlessly this entire season. Now, I will agree, a lot of people, including me, fell victim to the hype train after week one. That happens a lot in week one. I wrote about it in the article if you want to go check it out. It's going to be CFBCauldron.com. But sometimes because week one's your only sample size, that's the only thing you have to base your opinions off of. So sometimes you get carried away with those opinions after week one. The whole offseason, everyone was talking about that Anthony Richardson had to develop as a passer. And what people mean by that is if a team's able to take away his running ability, like Kentucky was, can Anthony Richardson beat you with his arm? And that's pivotal in the NFL because there's going to be some teams that will be able to take away his running ability. And Kentucky was really smart about how they did it as well. Sometimes they would pass rush, but they wouldn't pass rush to get sacked. They would pass rush to contain. They're in a contained defense. They would play a lot of zone. So Anthony Richardson, they have linebackers with their eyes on Anthony Richardson. They also spied him a few times. One of the sacks that Kentucky had, Anthony Richardson rolled out. Kentucky had a spy on him, was able to get sacked towards the sidelines. So Kentucky played really well on defense, including containing Anthony Richardson. Kentucky offense played better than the box score would indicate. So the Kentucky offense, if you take away the punt, I don't know why this is recorded under the rushing yard category, but the Kentucky punt that went over the punter's head because of a bad snap, counted as a negative rush. And also, if you take Will Levis's rushing yards out, Kentucky ran for 121 yards against this Florida defense, and Kentucky continued to run for more yards as the game progressed. ESPN had this great stat, if you're watching the game live, where it showed how many yards Kentucky ran for by quarter, and it increased from first to second to third to fourth. Kentucky was wearing on that Florida defense, and that's now the second straight game that we've seen a team wear on this Florida defensive line. Utah started having their way at the end of that game against Florida. I think it was mostly not because Utah figured out something offensively, just because Utah wore out the Florida defense a little bit. Kentucky did the same thing. I think depth is a little bit of a concern in Gainesville at certain positions. I think defensive line's one of them, which is why, credit to Billy Napier, he's going out and he's recruiting a great defensive line class right now because he knows he needs guys. He needs men in the building to play big boys to fill in the roles when stars have to come off the field. But also, Billy Napier, I don't get the decision. I tweeted out during the game, I don't get the decision to go for it on fourth down. It's 4th and 3 or 4th and 4. You go for it. You're at your own 40. Your quarterback's not having a great night. I understand you want to be confident in your players, but it's clear Anthony Richardson didn't have his best stuff that night. It's fine. He'll play better as the season progresses. But that game against Kentucky, Anthony Richardson wasn't playing his best. I don't get the decision to throw the football. Especially on 4th and 3. Florida ran the football well. I think sometimes Florida abandoned the run because they threw the football 35 times. That feels like a lot when Anthony Richardson. And Chandler said, I tuned in at the right time for a Gator fan. Yeah, and I don't know if you saw what I saw mentioned about Anthony Richardson earlier. I don't think you should overreact to his performance. He'll get better as the season progresses. But I don't understand that call by Billy Napier going for it. Especially when there's 8 minutes left in the game. That's an eternity in the football game. That's more than half a quarter. And you have all 3 timeouts, and your defense isn't playing that bad. I know Billy Napier's saying is scare money, don't make money. But you can't make dumb decisions like that. I think that's just kind of what it boiled down to. And same thing as goes for Billy Napier as goes for Anthony Richardson. It's Billy Napier's first SEC conference game. He's going to become better in those situations as he gets more experience. So, Florida fans, I see a lot of Florida fans overreacting. I saw someone say the other day, Urban Meyer went 9-3 in his first season. Don't compare Billy Napier to Urban Meyer, okay? I mean, you're comparing a first-time Power 5 head coach to one of the best college coaches of all time. That can't be your expectation. Florida will be fine. Calm down, Florida fans. Even if Florida wins 8 games this year, that's a very good year, and especially if Anthony Richardson progresses as the year goes on. So, Florida fans, don't freak out. And Kentucky's a really good program as well. I think sometimes we think of Kentucky as a basketball school. Kentucky's become a really good football program who's consistent year after year. Next night game I want to talk about was USC at Stanford. So, yeah, I did that right. So, USC at Stanford. This USC offense is so much fun to watch. I don't know if anyone watched this game, but this USC offense, I was really, really young for the Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush days, Lendale White, all of those days. But if you watch highlights of this USC offense, it kind of reminds you of those. I mean, you have Jordan Addison. I mean, I turn on the USC game, I forget that USC has last year's Biletnikoff winner. Then you see Mario Williams juke out 3 guys and then walk into the end zone. And Travis Dye had a great game, and he's really recognizable because he doesn't wear gloves either. But this USC offense is going to be a lot of fun to watch. USC's defense isn't going to be great, but they don't have to be. I mean, because this offense is going to put up a lot of points. So, and another thing is the USC defense did create 4 turnovers the other night, 2 at the goal line, and it was very closely timed possessions as well. USC, if they get 4 turnovers a game and this offense is clicking, they're not going to lose a lot of football games. I mean, Utah stylistically is going to be a really fun game to watch just because they play complete opposite brands of football. But this USC offense, I mean, Caleb Williams, and what impressed me about Caleb Williams the other night is he looked really good from the pocket. I mean, we know Caleb Williams escaping, taking the ball from as running back last season, getting the 4th down on the Kansas game. I mean, we know Caleb Williams as this guy who just makes crazy plays, but he looked really good from the pocket, was able to deliver the ball well the other night. That's what impressed me. And also, Stanford, I thought, looked pretty good. They implemented that slow mesh RPO scheme that they don't do it all the time, but they implemented a slow mesh RPO that Wake Forest does. So if you watch the Wake Forest offense, Stanford did a lot of that. And I think it matches really well with Tanner McGee, and it matches really well with the personnel that they have. So USC's offense really impressed me. Stanford looked pretty good. You just can't turn the ball over 4 times a win against a team like USC. So the last game we're going to recap is going to be the night game. This one went really late. BYU home against Baylor. And these two teams are really, really similar. I mean, so you think about it. Really, really sound, solid head coaches. Both guys that like to prioritize stopping the run, playing physical on both sides of football. They like to run the football. Similar teams, and it reflected in the game because it was a really close game. I think the biggest difference was Jaron Hall, BYU's quarterback. He had a little bit better game than Blake Shapen did, Baylor's quarterback. I think that ultimately was the outcome in this game. So Blake Shapen didn't have a bad game. I mean, he had 137 passing yards. He was 18 for 28. But I think Baylor, much like Notre Dame, was kind of missing that deep threat. So last year, if you watch Baylor, you knew Tyquan Thornton. He plays for the Patriots now. He could take the top off of any defense. I mean, legit track speed. I think he ran a high 4.2 at the combine. So Tyquan Thornton isn't there anymore for Baylor. What's their answer for a deep threat? I don't know if they have one, and not saying that they don't have one on the roster, but they don't have one currently in that offense. So I think you have to figure that out, or else teams can play really aggressive against you like BYU did, and they can prioritize stopping the run. Chase Roberts, BYU wide receiver. BYU had their top 2 receivers from a year before out. Chase Roberts was a young guy, stepped up, had a great game. This is actually him right here. This is a catch in the corner of the end zone right before the half. Great throw by Jaron Hall. Ultimately, BYU being able to stretch the field a little bit more than Baylor and being a little bit more consistent on offense really, really helped BYU in the end. So that brings us to the end of our Week 2 recap. So now we're going to get into the Week 2 picks. Don't want to do this, but you got to. So it was a rough week. And I told you guys last week, I'm not going to be one that shies away from my picks. If I have a bad week, I'm telling you. I'm going to be honest. So first game was Southern Miss at Miami over. Miami offense was more vanilla than ice cream. I mean, it was bad. And they scored 30 points, but you knew going into that game that Miami would have to score a lot for that over to hit. I expected them to open the offense up a little bit more. I expected Tyler Van Dyke to throw the ball a little bit more. Didn't happen at all. That was a loss. UTSA at Army. UTSA should have won this game multiple times. I mean, they allowed a long touchdown. They allowed an explosive touchdown to Army. Multiple times, actually, but at the end of regulation, so Army tied it. UTSA had a 41-yard field goal at the end of the game to win it and cover. Missed it about 15 yards right. They ended up winning in overtime. So thank you to the Roadrunners. I'm now 1-0-1 betting the Roadrunners this season. So I may have to stick with the hot hand here and just keep betting UTSA. Congratulations to Lance Leopold and Kansas. They went into Morgantown and beat West Virginia. I thought West Virginia would come off of a big backyard brawl game, play inspired. They should have won the game. They came out flat. And Jalen Daniels, if you haven't watched him, Kansas' quarterback, he's a really fun young player to watch. Explosive guy, can kind of manufacture big plays from nothing. This Kansas team, I mean, you have to think, with this win, you have to be thinking at least 5 to 6 wins. I mean, you're getting close to bowl eligibility now. You start 2-0 with a conference road win. So, congratulations to the Jayhawks. And there's not much to talk about on my moneyline favorite parlay. That was never close to hitting. I mean, I had App State and Notre Dame on there. And that Notre Dame wasn't even as close. The game wasn't as close as the final score indicated either. So, it is what it is. Survive and advance. We move on to week 3 now. Now, I did say that I didn't love the week 2 board. I like the week 3 board a little bit more. I'm hammering Nebraska at 11.5. All Nebraska does is play close games. I understand Scott Frost is out of there. They lost to Georgia Southern. I don't care. Nebraska is not getting blown out at home by Oklahoma. Oklahoma didn't look great last week against UTEP either. So give me the Huskers at home. Give me the Doors on the road in Northern Illinois. Don't know how their AD agreed to that game, but give them to me money line plus 115 on the road. BYU plus 3.5 minus 105, so I got a little bit of juiced odds there. I like the Cougars. They played really well last week. I'm hoping they keep up the effort against Oregon team that I think is probably a little overrated. The only total play I have this week is the Mississippi State LSU over. I like the over here because I expect the LSU offense to look better than they did against Florida State, and they scored 23 against Florida State as well. I can't take away much from the Southern game they played last week. They're playing no offense to Southern, but LSU for them, that's like playing a high school team. So can't take away much from that game. But LSU looked much better at the end of the Florida State game when they start implementing tempo into that offense. I think they'll come out here, and we know what Will Rogers and the Bulldogs can do on offense as well. So like the over here in Death Valley, it's gonna be 53 minus 110. Texas Tech and NC State. Kind of surprised to see that this wasn't closer to 6 or 7 points. Donovan Smith is Texas Tech's backup. He's in for Tyler Show, who got knocked out during the first game of the season. He's one of the best backups in the country if you haven't watched Texas Tech. But, yeah, that seems like a lot of points, especially since NC State didn't play very good against East Carolina either. So give me the Red Raiders here on the road, plus 10. And then San Diego State at Utah. Give me the Utes minus 21, and that's going to be a minus 110 bet as well. I think San Diego State, they struggled. They actually didn't struggle. They lost pretty bad week 1 to Arizona. Utah lost to San Diego State last year. I think it's a bit of a revenge game. Also, I think this line would be a little bit larger if Utah beat Florida. Utah's still a really good team. Give me them minus 21 at home. So now we're going to move into our top matchups or most anticipated matchups this weekend for week 3. And we're going to go in order. So number 1, we're going to start with Georgia at South Carolina. Few things I'm looking for this game. Is Georgia going to try to replicate what Arkansas did? I mean, I would. If I could run the ball for 300 yards on an opponent at will, I would absolutely do that. So look to see what Georgia's offensive philosophy is when they head into this game. Are they just going to try to ground and pound South Carolina, or are they going to open up a little bit more like they did against Oregon? As for South Carolina, how does Spencer Rattler look? I think he looked pretty good against Arkansas. I don't think I touched on it earlier. But Spencer Rattler didn't look bad against Arkansas. They were able to make a few deep plays down the field. And no matter how Spencer Rattler plays for South Carolina, he's going to be an upgrade to what they had last year at the quarterback position. So look for South Carolina here. How do they respond, especially after losing a tough physical game on the road to Arkansas? How do they respond at home as a 24.5-point underdog? Next game, I touched on this one a little bit earlier. I have the Cougars here, but it's going to be BYU at Oregon. Second most anticipated matchup of the weekend. A big win for BYU at home. I mean, beating the Big 12 champions of last year is no small feat. So look for Jaron Hall, Kalani Sitake. Hopefully BYU gets the receivers back. And then Bo Nix on the Oregon side. Bo Nix didn't look great against Georgia. Georgia's defense is on another level, but this BYU defense is really good. So how does Bo Nix look against this Georgia, and how does this Oregon offense as a whole look against this BYU defense this week? My most anticipated matchup of this weekend, and this is the game that I talked about earlier. We're going to do a full game breakdown right now of it. It's going to be Miami at Texas A&M. This is an interesting matchup for so many reasons. The App State loss makes it even more interesting. So let's hop right into it. We're going to go quick game preview of this one. We're going to go keys of the game for each side. So let's start out with Miami. The road team goes first. I think it's important for the Canes to get Tyler Van Dyke into the rhythm. I mean, Tyler Van Dyke is one of the best quarterbacks when he's hot in the entire country. We saw last year, his first 3 starts didn't go quite to plan. One of them was a pancake, so he didn't play a ton. But he played against Virginia, North Carolina last year. Didn't have a good game in either of those. Then he got into a rhythm against a really good NC State defense. The last 6 starts of the season, he threw for at least 300 yards and at least 3 touchdowns each game. So look for Tyler Van Dyke to try to get, and Josh Gaddis for Tyler Van Dyke to get him in a rhythm earlier in this game. The defensive line must take advantage of this young Texas A&M offensive line. The Texas A&M offensive line really struggled last week against App State. They've had a few injuries. They've had to shuffle guys around, put some younger guys in. So look for this defensive line for Miami, which is really deep. And I mean, they have Akeem Mesidor, Leonard Taylor, Jafari Harvey, Chance Williams. They have a lot of really good players, and they're also really deep at the position. So look for them to try to get after this Texas A&M offensive line. As for the Aggies, Texas A&M has to be able to run the football against Miami. We know they're probably not going to have a dynamic passing attack, just what they have at the quarterback position. So Devin Achane is one of the best running backs in the country. He's an absolute speedster, home run threat. Get him the ball a lot. He needs more than 11 offensive touches. So you have to be able to run the football against this Miami defense, especially since the linebacker play is going to be subpar. A&M, I think it's important to win one-on-one matchups on the outside. We talked about earlier, this Miami second outside corner position isn't settled by any means. So A&M, if you can get Evan Stewart matched up on the second Miami outside corner, I think there's a good shot that Evan Stewart's going to win that battle. So you have to be able to get your guys to beat their guys one-on-one. And I know that's an important part of playing football in general, but it's really important in this matchup when Miami already is struggling at a certain position. And then the complete opposite of my first point, make Tyler Van Dyke uncomfortable. You have to do it early and you have to do it often. I mean, Texas A&M's defense isn't really built with a lot of traditional edge rushers. They like it to have a big defensive line. So they're not going to get a lot of sacks, but they're going to make a quarterback uncomfortable by collapsing the pocket. So look for Texas A&M. Get after him early. Maybe send a few blitzes, which Texas A&M doesn't do a whole lot, but maybe send a few blitzes. Get after him. Don't let him get into that rhythm because you don't want Tyler Van Dyke to get hot. So I'm sure the Aggies are preaching that. We had to knock this guy off of his game, and he's a completely different quarterback if he's not in a rhythm and not completing passes early on. Last thing I want to talk about today. While I'm watching this game, there's going to be 5 things I'm looking for. Does Haynes King start for A&M? And if he starts, does he finish? Because there's a big difference between starting and finishing games. So there's been a lot of reports this week that Texas A&M has played all 3 quarterbacks in practice with the ones. So Max Johnson, Haynes King, and true freshman Connor Wegman have ran with the ones this week. It's kind of something you want to do in fall camp and get it out of the way. I don't think that's something you want to be doing game week of the biggest game of the season to this point. But that shows that Jimbo Fisher's exploring all options when it comes to who's going to start at the quarterback position. So does Haynes King go out there with the first team? Now, the good thing is Haynes King is a little more mobile than Max Johnson is. So with the shaky offensive line, maybe Jimbo Fisher's thinking this guy can escape the pocket. He can pick up positive yards. He can use his feet. Maybe that's Jimbo Fisher's thinking behind keeping Haynes King in. But I guess we'll see. Won't be able to see till game time. And then will he finish the game as well? Next one is who does Miami start at that second corner position? Last week we saw 3 different guys. Which one of them rolls out there first and maybe it could be Isaiah Dunson, who we didn't see last week at all. Be interested to see who Miami rolls out there at that position. Can the Miami receivers generate separation? So the Miami receivers, it's a younger group. Texas A&M has really big physical defensive backs. Are these Miami receivers able to generate separation and give Tyler Van Dyke open receivers down the field to throw to? Does Jimbo Fisher become more creative in how he gets his playmakers the football? Last week, Evan Stewart, who's probably the second best playmaker on this offense behind Devin Achane, only caught 5 passes. And that was a lot of passes given they've only completed 13 the entire game. But Jimbo Fisher has to be able to get the ball in the hands of his playmakers. Swing the ball to Devin Achane. Give it to him on jet sweep. Give Evan Stewart a screen. I mean, the Texas A&M offense, I know a lot of people call the Texas A&M offense expired. I'm not arguing with you, but you have to figure out a way, especially in today's college football, get your quarterback into the rhythm, get your playmakers into the rhythm. Those are the things you need to do to get easy yards early in the game. And then the last one, what does, to be honest, I wrote a long sentence there. What does Miami look like on both sides of the football as far as scheme? Is basically a summary of it. Miami's been vanilla, like I said, more vanilla than ice cream the past 2 weeks as far as what they've showed us on film. I'm really interested because these are two really creative coordinators. You have Kevin Steele. He was the defensive coordinator at Auburn when they played at the 2019 LSU offense and held them to 24 points. And he came out with some wonky looks. I mean, it was like a 3-2-6 with 3 safeties and 3 corners. A lot of crazy stuff that Kevin Steele has done in the past. Does he do it against A&M, or does he think a traditional 4-2-5 that he likes to play is enough to get it done? Also, on the other side of the football, Josh Gaddis, I mean, if you watched that Ohio State-Michigan game last year, you know what Josh Gaddis is capable of. So, what does Josh Gaddis do? I mean, is he coming out? How does he get the ball in the hands of his playmakers? Does he try to get the ball to Xavier Restrepo early? Does he try to get the ball in the hands of Rashad Smith, who's kind of, don't want to call him Deebo Samuel, but kind of fills that role for this Miami offense? So those are the 5 things I'm going to be looking for while I watch this game. So that's actually all we got for tonight. Like I said, feel free to drop a comment. Let me know if you want me to talk about any team, talk about any matchup. So that would be if you want to talk to me about for next week's show. If you want me to talk about a Week 4 matchup, I'd be more than happy to. I'd preview it like I just did against for the Miami Texas A&M game. If you have any questions, recommendations, concerns, anything, email is going to be cfbcauldron@gmail.com. All the socials, it's here on the bottom, CFB Cauldron on all the socials, and you also feel free to drop a comment in the YouTube section. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Hope you guys have a great weekend of